right. I'm not good at the intros yet, so
I'm here with young Brendan Robideau, up-and-coming filmmaker from Lafayette, who's making a podcast, and for some reason can't get anybody else to talk to him, so he's here talking to me.
That's right. All right, well, thank you for joining me. I'm here with Allan Durand, and I wanted to speak with him because he's a bit of an icon for me, and definitely an influential person in the city. So I wanted to speak with him about his career, about his life growing up here and in St. Martinville, and just get a little insight into what it was like back then, and also what his career is taking him now. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I wanted to ask you a little bit. We'll jump into the career here in a little bit, but I just kind of wanted to get a little bit of your history, a little bit of your story growing up. So just tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I was born and raised in St. Martinville and still live there, although I've practiced law here for 36 years now. I lived not in town, but just out of town. Where I lived then is in town now, but it wasn't then.
Right.
Went to Catholic grammar school there, Catholic high school in Newberry, undergraduate school at USL, law school at SMU. Law school first at LSU, got my law degree, then was a lawyer in the service, then went to Dallas for 2 years to SMU and got an advanced degree from law school there. And then moved back here in 1981 and started practicing law with some friends of mine, and made my first film in 1981.
Okay, so that's the interesting thing. You go into law school, you become a lawyer, start your practice, but there's a passion for filmmaking deep down, obviously.
There's an addiction for filmmaking deep down.
Where did that come from?
I have no idea. I had it since my earliest memories, since first time I saw television. My grandfather bought a television. I was 5 or 6 years old, and we went over there and turned it on. And I don't know, Disney is just starting having a TV show, or Rin Tin Tin or something like that. And I was fascinated, and it never went away.
So explain to me then why you even went into law school in the first place then.
Oh, I had no confidence at all,
as most in the film industry,
that I'd ever be able to make. I didn't know anybody in the film business. There was no film industry in Louisiana at the time. Every now and then, somebody would come make a film here because of some scenery requirement. But there was no film industry here. And when I went to law school, I didn't even consider that an option.
Right.
By the time I finished law school and was getting ready to go I was in Dallas, had gotten my master's degree in tax, and I was in the process of applying to USC Film School. And because by that time I wanted to give it a try.
Right.
And then before I could mail the application in, my wife said, "Guess what? I'm pregnant." And so that shut everything down. And but then that shut down my ability to go to USC Film School.
Right.
But after that, I moved to New Orleans, and when I moved back here in '81, I had written a manuscript for a novel that I wanted to make into a movie. And I connected from reading a newspaper article about Glenn Petrie, the great Cajun filmmaker, who then was Glenn Petrie, the young, unknown Cajun filmmaker.
Right.
And he helped me film. We made a short, and then we started working on Bel-Azaire. And then after we made Bel-Azaire, I thought that was probably it for me, because I had a law practice and I didn't know anything about making films. I knew a lot more after Bel-Azaire than I did before. But
trial and error kind of thing?
Well, it's just trial by fire. Glenn had made some films. He hadn't made one in English yet, but hadn't made one on 35 millimeter yet. But we went we had a script, and then it was selected for the Sundance June Lab, which was and still is a big deal, and that just put us in a different category and gave us enough credibility to raise the money to make it. And then we went and made it, and had a bunch of good luck and no bad accidents, and the film got made and got selected to the official competition at Cannes and the official competition at Sundance. And so Glenn was at that point on his way, and I said, well, I guess that's it for me. And then probably about 10 years later, I just couldn't stand it anymore. And so I decided I was going to make a documentary on the Texas Rangers, who fascinated me. So I talked the public television station in Houston into co-producing with me a 90-minute documentary on the Texas Rangers. And then after that, I wanted to make another one, and then that's when I started making the Willie Francis documentary, and I had a lot of luck with it, as my little friends here will attest. And then, which I was using as a marketing tool to be able to market the screenplay I had written for the feature film version.
Right.
And then submitted it to the Academy for the Nicholl Award.
Yep.
And won that in 2012.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. Let's step back real quick. So, about Bellazzar. Am I pronouncing that correctly, by the way?
Bellazzar.
Bellazzar, thank you. So, about Bellazzar, Glenn Petrie directed that one.
Wrote and directed.
Okay.
And he and I produced it.
And you and him produced it. So, you said there was some luck in making that one, correct?
Yeah, well, first of all, we got lucky and raised the money.
Right.
And which is another story for another podcast, because we had 3 days left to raise $500,000, or we had to give back the money we raised already. And then a 3-night miniseries starts on NBC starring Armando Santi, who we had been showing everybody's picture as going to be the star. And they said, oh, well, it's what Glenn and Sprinky are doing must be real. So the last 3 days we raised $500,000 and went and make the movie. But then we had wonderful cooperation. I mean, the people at Kate and Village pretty much turned the whole thing over to us.
Right.
We had so many volunteers let us use their horses and their cattle and all sorts of things. We went 4 weeks without rain in May, and had no problems that we couldn't solve on the set. Had Robert Duvall down here helping us, and it just everything clicked. We just got really lucky.
So I do want to talk about the origin of Sprinky, of why people call you Sprinky.
Yes.
But before that, you mentioned Robert Duvall being in the film. That's you kind of slid it in there, but that's a big deal.
So it was a big deal. Yeah.
Of course. And so I'm wondering, what I mean, I see the pictures here, of y'all on set hanging on the wall. So I'm wondering, how did that happen?
Well, the Sundance June Lab, for the 3 or 4 people watching this who don't know what it is the Sundance Institute, founded by Robert Redford, started in 1981. They would have scripts submitted to them, and they'd pick 5 a year, and you go up to Sundance for a month. And they give you a film crew and some professional actors who have volunteered to be there and who have studied your script. And Mr. Redford says, what's your toughest scene? And you say, well, it's this one. And he said, okay, let's go shoot it.
And they still do that the exact same way today. Yeah.
Still do it today. Of course, back then, we watched films every night together on a sheet in the little house where they rented skis during the winter.
Right.
And but now they've got their own studio. I mean, it's
much bigger.
Operation.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a lot more fun back then, I bet you. And
A little closer knit. Yeah.
So the actress who had volunteered to come up and play the female lead for us while we were there was Robert Duvall's wife. So he wasn't working, so he was up there with her. We got to meet him, and so when we made the film, there was no intention at that point that he was going to be in the film.
Right.
But this scene came up where we needed a Protestant preacher conducting a funeral, and he volunteered to do it. And for free, which was
Wow.
amazing. But he was down here while his wife was making the film, and he took the car that we rented for her, and he'd drive around looking for locations he wanted to, at that time he had written the script for The Apostle, which he eventually made 10 years later and got an Academy Award nomination for. But so he was down here, and we were trying to work out this scene, and he says, I'm playing a preacher in this script I wrote. Let me show you how I think a preacher should do it. And boy, he just did this performance that left us sitting on the seat of our pants. And we said, is there any chance I'd love to do it. Yeah, sure. Just don't tell my agent. His agent found out and got really mad. But it's too bad. We had to film
Right.
it.
It was already
It's too late.
it was already printed.
Yeah.
And y'all ended up shooting that one on 35?
Yes.
And that was both of y'all's first time on 35. You said
Yes.
before that Glenn was only shooting on 16.
Correct.
So that's a significant cost increase, but also, I mean, that's a whole nother ballpark when it comes to production wise. So
Yeah.
that's impressive. Okay, so let's talk about why people call you Sprinky.
I got that nickname when I was 4 weeks old.
Wow.
Now, figure out how a 4-week-old little baby boy would get a nickname like Sprinky.
I can imagine.
Okay, well, there you go. That's how I got it.
And so it just stuck. Your parents
It
called
stuck.
you that, and then friends of parents, and then friends
Well,
of yours?
my father's name was Allan, and there was a kid in St. Martinville who he really didn't like, whose nickname was Junior. And right out of the box, people started calling me Junior. So he was rabid to find a nickname, and that's the first one that
Made sense.
that sprayed up. So that's what I got. And in St. Martinville, it's kind of required by law that you have a nickname anyway.
Of course. All right, so going to the Sundance Labs is an accolade that most people would dream of, okay?
Oh, we did too.
Exactly, but it happened for you. So, I mean,
Yeah.
most people, it's in their wildest dreams
Well,
to make it into the lab.
Let me take that back, because when Glenn called to tell me that we were under consideration, Sundance was 2 years old at that point. I had no
that's
idea
right.
what it was. It was brand new. And but the independent film business in the late 70s, around 1980, pretty much had gone out of existence.
Right.
And Redford created Sundance to try to bring it back to life. But I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, well, he certainly brought it back to life
Yeah.
where it is today.
Yeah.
Independent film is still,
That's where Soderbergh got his start. Steven Soderbergh,
right.
the Oscar-winning director from Baton Rouge.
Absolutely.
Sex, Lives, and Videotape was a Sundance June Lab production.
That's right. Quentin Tarantino, many directors have come out of that same lab. So what I was saying is that it's such an accomplishment just to make it into the Sundance Lab. And most people would be happy there, but you continued. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about Willie Francis. We'll get into the fellowship,
Yeah.
but I want to talk a little bit about the documentary first. So explain to me kind of the impetus of making the documentary. I know you had said after Belisaire, and then you went and made another documentary.
Right.
After quite a few years, you wanted to get back into it, and then Willie Francis. So tell me a little bit about the documentary and how it came to you.
Well, I'd made the Texas Rangers, and it was a very enjoyable experience because unlike a feature film or a short film, there's no deadline. I mean, I was funding it, so there was nobody to fuss at me on how I was spending the money. I mean, I probably spent $5,000 making the Willie Francis documentary. I mean, it wasn't a huge expenditure.
Right.
Even a stumbling, bumbling young lawyer could afford it, or a middle-aged lawyer. But I enjoy, and the best part about it, no deadline and no actors. You don't have to.
Right.
You don't have to
deal with
the egos.
actors.
And if you're a control freak, it's the perfect medium because you can control every single aspect of it. My editor doesn't make any editorial decisions. I sit there with him and tell him what to put and where to put and where to cut. And I just know what I want. And I know what I like.
Right.
And there's probably ways to do it better, but I don't like them as well as the way I want to do it.
Sure. Well, it's your
But
workflow.
I wanted to make another one, and as a matter of fact, there was I had a client and a friend here in town named Junior Weil, Weill, who was in the construction business, who had a brother in Baton Rouge who was in the advertising business, who was a big muckety-muck with Louisiana Public Broadcasting. And I called him. I happened to be with him, and I said, boy, I sure would like to make a film with LPB instead of having to drive all the way to Houston. Why don't you co-produce one with me? And he said, well, I'll help you with LPB, but you don't really need me to co-produce it. And he said, what do you want to do? And I told him some of my ideas. And he said, well, you're from St. Martinville. The best story that's never been made is from St. Martinville. And I said, what's that? Evangeline? He said, no, Willie Francis. And it hit me.
Right.
And of course, all I knew is that Willie Francis had been put in the electric chair, didn't die, and then they did it again later. But once there was a book on it written by I can't remember, Arthur Miller and another guy, and who had researched the heck out of it. And it was the real story was fascinating. He was innocent, and then the Supreme Court almost gets in fist fights when the case gets up there. It's a fascinating story. And then it turns out the executioners were drunk at the first execution. I'm never going to get my hands on that good a story again, which is why I've been sticking with the screenplay all these years.
Right. Okay, so...
But by the way, I ended up never not making it at LPB. I ended up making that one at Houston Public Television also. But,
you did?
Yeah. It was just it was easier to get it done there than in Baton Rouge.
I understand. So you ended up getting Danny Glover to narrate that.
Yeah.
Give me a little bit of the story of there, how you got him involved.
I knew Danny Glover was the biggest anti-capital punishment activist in Hollywood. And I knew who his agent was. I didn't know him personally, but I found out he was represented by this woman at ICM. So I had finished the documentary, and I got Mike Barra, who's from St. Martinville, but he was the manager of Channel 10 here in Lafayette for 40 years. And and he had a good radio voice because he started with Passepartout or something. Mm-hmm. So I got him to narrate it for me. And I sent the DVD, not the DVD back, it was tape, the tape with his narration on it to Danny Glover's agent, and said, this is a very important story about capital punishment. I think Mr. Glover would really find it interesting, and I'm willing to go rob liquor stores if that's what it takes to get some money to pay him. And so a couple of months later, I come back to the office, and my secretary, who's my daughter, holds up a phone message, and it's from Danny Glover. He was on the set somewhere and called me and said, okay, I'll do it. Call my scheduler and we'll get together. So he was in Washington meeting with the Venezuelan ambassador, and I went up there and met him, and we drove him over to public television station in Washington, and he got in the booth, and in about an hour he had done it. And never asked for a dollar.
Wow.
I mean, just blind. More luck. I mean, don't ever estimate the value of luck.
And so that documentary has gone on. Obviously, for those who aren't watching and who are just listening, we're sitting here, and there's many awards for the documentary. Not only a poster that has all of the names of the festivals that it's been to, but also the actual trophies that it's won. So tell me a few of the ones that you're most proud of that it has taken home.
Every one of them. The Charlotte International Film Festival was the first one I won. Then I think, or Memphis International Film Festival, and then Santa Monica International Film Festival, and then the New York Independent International Film Festival, and it was a finalist for the Grand Jury Prize at the Atlanta Film Festival and at the Santa Barbara Film Festival. And
what year is this, by the way?
2006, 2007, something about it like that. But your average film festival that you never heard of, that the average film fan never heard of, Santa Barbara, Austin, they get 4,000 or 5,000 entries,
Right.
and and there's maybe 20 slots. Sundance last year had 12,700 entries for 36 slots.
Yep.
And so getting into a film festival is an incredible achievement.
Right.
And no doubt in my mind, now my story was the best story in every film festival I went to, even the ones I didn't win.
Right.
In my opinion, it was. But what got it into those festivals was, it starts off and they're in big letters, narrated by Danny Glover. So because of his name, I think people looked at it seriously and said, oh, I better watch this close. It may be good. And, you're a young fella. You were raised on MTV and color television. But this story takes place in the 40s. A lot of the photography in it is black and white. And, for these festivals, if you got to look at 5,000 films, you have to have volunteers to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of those are college-age people or people in their 20s. And they look at all these old black and white stills, and, they just tune it out. And,
Right.
And because I ended up getting in 12 or 13 festivals, but I probably applied to 60 of them. And
Well, even though for most people, that ratio is incredible. Most people who are submitted to
I
festivals probably
promise
submit into 60 and maybe make it into one or two if they're lucky.
No,
So you're right about that. But at the same time, making it into the ones you did is still a significant amount of film festivals.
well, it's a credit to the story, and because that's the key to filmmaking. You don't have to be a great filmmaker if you got a great story. And if you're a great filmmaker and a crummy story, it doesn't do you a bit of good. If you don't believe me, go to the Grand 16 and just pick any screen at random. There's a lot.
We
of
haven't
great
had a
filmmakers.
lot of good releases lately.
No, when they built the Grand 16, I said they can't possibly fill up 16 screens without at least 2 or 3 good films. But lo and behold,
Yeah.
wrong again.
Maybe around Oscar season we'll get a few more,
Yeah.
a few more good ones. Okay, so I would say your biggest achievement is what you did afterwards from the documentary, at least in my book, something that inspires me a lot. And I want to tell the people that don't understand what the Nicholl Fellowship is a little bit about it. And you can jump in at any point. But as far as I know, the Nicholl Fellowship, as a screenwriter, is the biggest screenwriting competition, so to speak, that you can get into. It is
It's the biggest in the world
yeah,
and the most prestigious in the world.
more than Sundance, which is also, probably the second most prestigious. I know last year they had, and this is just for screenplays, it was, I guess, bought out or owned now by the Academy of Motion Pictures, so it's the Oscars now, is the Nicholl Fellowship. And I believe
it's always been run by the Academy. The last 30 years, it's an Academy.
Oh, okay. I thought that at first it was something they...
It started with the Academy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So it is the Academy, and which means, of course, that it is the most prestigious. I think last year they had 8,900 screenplays submitted.
Correct.
From there, they break it down to quarterfinalists, semifinalists, finalists, and then fellows.
Right.
So they usually have around 300 quarterfinalists, I think 150 semifinalists. If you make it to the semifinalist round, it's an accolade that you can, use when you're sending out query letters. People are generally pretty interested about the semifinalists and above. And then there's 10 finalists or 20, something like that. And then 5 fellows.
No more than 5. Some years
Right.
they do less than 5, but never more than 5.
Right. And so you are an actual Nicholl Fellowship fellow.
One out of 5.
One of the 5. And I think that was 2012.
Yeah. Now, I submitted it 2 years before that and made it to the semifinals.
Gotcha.
And then I said, I'm going to take one more crack at this, and then I'm quitting screenwriting. So I'd probably written 7 or 8 at that point. But
Right.
This is it, last shot. So I tweaked the script a little bit, set it in one more time, and then made the semifinals. I figured it ought to make the semifinals again.
Right, at least the semis, maybe more.
Made the semifinals, and about a month later, I was here by myself. My daughter, who's my assistant, wasn't here. And the phone rings, and I look at the caller ID, and it says Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. And I knew they didn't call to tell you that you didn't.
No, they send emails for that.
Yeah.
They don't do personalized
So that
rejection
was,
phone calls.
I mean, like for people my age, where were you when Kennedy was shot? I mean,
Right.
it's like it happened 2 minutes ago. I can remember looking at my screen and seeing
Right.
it. But what I didn't know, which would have intimidated me to no end, is once you get down to the semifinals,
Mm-hmm.
the final jury, the jury that picks the 10 finalists, is made up of 35 Academy members, each of whom has either won or been nominated for an Oscar. When I found that out, I couldn't catch my breath, because I don't know if I would have had the courage to have people at that level of competence.
Right.
But anyway, that's the way they do it. So it's the year I won, there were 7,197 screenwriters from 66 different countries.
Right. I mean, it is the thing. If you're a screenwriter, you know that your goal in getting your name out there or getting representation is to try and make it into the Nicholl.
You instantly find out, if you're an old wreck like me, you instantly find out what it'd be like to be the prettiest and most popular girl in town.
Right, by being able to say you're a Nicholl.
Your phone starts ringing off the wall, and William Morris and CAA, we can't wait to meet you, and all of that.
I do want to talk about kind of what it was like for you after the Nicholl. Again, as far as I know, semifinalists, finalists, you're going to get some calls. Fellow is, I'm assuming the phone's ringing off the hook.
Well, I probably had 24 agents or producers call me that first week wanting to see the script, or they had already read the script and they wanted to talk to me about representing me. And I ended up going with William Morris, and still with William Morris.
Same agent?
Same agent. And we have a Nicholl alumni dinner every year in November. The Nicholl Award is given on a Thursday in November. The next night we have an alumni dinner, and all of the previous fellowship winners are invited. And when I get to talk to the ones who just won and they say, give me some advice, I tell them two things. You've got some heat now, but let me tell you two things about it. It's not as hot as you think it is, and it's not going to last very long. You got to
utilize your time.
You got about a week to 2 weeks to cash in on this, and after that, what doesn't happen in those first 2 weeks, that's going to be 5 years in November that I won it.
Right.
And I've gotten a couple of writing jobs since then, but they were on spec. I got a writing job last week from a producer in Los Angeles who's going to pay me to write a script. And that's
what a dream.
That's the first paid writing job I've got since winning the Nicholl Fellowship.
Right. Everything else was just on spec. They just want to see.
It's hard to underestimate how few guarantees there are in the film business. I mean, you can win the Nicholl, you can win an Oscar. That doesn't mean you're ever going to work again.
Right.
It's the weirdest business in the world. Anybody who gets involved in it ought to have their head examined, me included, me especially. But I'm old enough to know better.
I feel the same. So where is Willie Francis right now? I mean, you got representation. Did some people option it, or you still own all the rights?
It was optioned, then the option expired, and it's under another option right now, which expires on June 1st.
Why are they having? This seems like a no-brainer. It's a film that, and this, especially in today, I mean, it's a film that needs to be seen.
Well, I had high hopes with this latest, and I'm working with an independent producer. I say I'm working. 10 or 12 years ago, there's an agent in Los Angeles named Ray Brothers, who's from Lafayette, and he started with CAA, and he represents mainly NBA players. But he's involved in the film business. He's produced a film, and he wants to produce Willie Francis. And he'd like to be able to put it together. Of course, we can't do anything about it now until that option expires.
Right.
But I really felt that that we were close a couple of times. And when this latest thing came up a year ago, I thought we were really close, because one of the senior guys at CAA was working on it, still is working on it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a hard film to get made because it doesn't have a happy ending. And my understanding is that 80% of theater tickets are purchased by people 25 and under. And there are not going to be a lot of teenage boys lining up with their dates to go see Willie Francis when it eventually gets made.
Right.
And the reality of the flip side of the coin is it's a movie you can make really cheap. And so it's not going to have a huge audience to get your money back and even make some money. But it's the kind of story that wins gold statues. And
It is. And I mean, I've read the screenplay, and not saying this just because you're sitting across from me. I mean, it was one of the most incredible stories I've ever read. And that I was a complete, but I mean, yes, the story is incredible. And honestly, it's hard to describe it as incredible because it is such a morbid story.
Yeah.
And, you want to pay honor to Willie. And I think you have, because you've written something that's so remarkable and so, I mean, it takes your breath away, really, just finding out what happened and then realizing that it was all true,
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I agree with you that younger people, it may not be the Baywatch.
I think college kids, people in college, would at least a relatively significant portion of them would probably want to see it,
Right.
Because of the timeliness of it and the social justice aspects of it.
Sure.
But again, one thing a distributor looks at is potential foreign revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Hard to place Willie Francis overseas.
Well, I agree, but well too. I mean, 12 Years a Slave, those kind of films, they did see immense success, and honestly, like you said, a lot of the younger people are the ones who buy the tickets. But I guess these kind of films are safe for the older generation.
Oh, sure.
And so although they don't buy that many tickets, this is the kind of film that they're buying tickets for.
Well, sure.
So I eagerly await the day that it finally comes out.
Well, it's eventually going to get made. I hope it gets made in my lifetime. But I've over, Barry White's, who's a longtime producer, semi-retired now in Los Angeles. I mean, we used to go pitch this story 15 or 20 years ago in Los Angeles. And at the end of it, people are crying, "Oh, what a sad story! Film's got to be made." I get all excited,
but not by us.
And no, but what can we do about the ending?
Oh.
And I look around to see who they're talking to, and unfortunately, they're talking to me. And I said, "Well, it's a true story. I mean, what can you do about that?"
No, and the ending needs to stay the way it is, no matter what. And I appreciate you staying true to the story, because anything else would be a disservice. I think.
Actually, I've upgraded the ending, and it's, you need to read it.
Okay, I can get another copy.
Oh yeah.
I would love it. I mean, seriously, it was one of the most incredible screenplays I've ever read.
Well, while you're taking down the equipment, I'll go upstairs and I'll email it to you.
Okay, perfect. But yeah, I mean, as a screenwriter, I try and, obviously I'm reading a lot and getting inspiration, but also learning about the craft. And the way you crafted that story, because it is a true story, so there's only a certain amount of creativity, but the way you did it was definitely something that is unique to you, and it's a page turner, that's for sure.
Well, it's a really good story. But remember this when you're writing screenplays, even based on a true story, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. If you gotta,
of course,
if you gotta embellish a little bit,
right? Of course,
to make it a smoother transition,
right?
Don't hesitate.
Absolutely. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, I guess, your career now. You're still a lawyer. Are you still practicing?
Yep.
And while you're doing that, you're also working now on or at least since then, now you're working on a new project. Can you talk a little bit about that one?
Yeah, it's another true story, and as a matter of fact, I just got back from the library getting books on the Holocaust in Holland. It's about a young couple that fell in love as they were getting thrown into a concentration camp,
Whoa.
and then survived, and it ended up getting married, moved to the United States, and lived happily ever after.
Oh, wow. So have you got to meet the couple yet?
No, they did.
Oh, right.
But there's a
course.
documentary about it, and there's a book about it, and
What age were they when they were thrown in?
20, 21, 22.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Have you met any relatives or anything like that?
No. I just learned about I just met with the producer the first time last week,
Gotcha.
and it's a brand new story to me. But one of my favorite fiction authors writes historical fiction set in Paris during World War II. And I've read all of his books 3 times, and so I have some familiarity with the genre, with the area and the times and what was going on. And one of my screenplays was about the liberation of Paris in August 1944. I'm convinced, to my mind, the last romantic period that occurred was World War II, and everything since then has been kind of blah or yuck.
Right.
So I love that period. That's my favorite historical period, and I think I'll be able to make a story out of it for them.
I believe so. You also have, I'm assuming, quite a few other screenplays that are just sitting around. I mean, do you
Yep.
have any plans with those? Do you have any desire to go out and just make one yourself? Or
No.
what? Okay.
No, having done that before, first of all, I'm not interested in doing anything but writing. Having done it before, and maybe having to accept a little bit of a producer role if the Willie Francis movie gets made, because we're going to make it in St. Martinville,
Right.
and to ensure the full cooperation of the community and do what I can to make it go smooth, I'm going to probably be involved in that
Right.
when that day comes. But some studio came to me and said, here's some blank checks. Go make Liberation of Paris and Mary Magdalene and Bass Reeves. And Bass Reeves was a lawman in the Old West. He arrested more bad guys and killed more bad guys than any other lawman in the Old West, and is thought to be the basis for the myth of the Lone Ranger. And he was a runaway slave.
Oh.
And so, great story. And what's my other favorite ones? Oh, Frank Hamer, the guy who hunted down Bonnie and Clyde, and then retired from the Texas Rangers. Most famous Texas Ranger of the 20th century.
And so these are all screenplays that you have written?
Yeah. I mean, somebody came give me a check, I'd go get Clint Eastwood to play Frank Hamer. We'd go
Right.
make that dude right now.
Right.
But what it takes to get a film made, I don't know what it takes to get a film financed and distributed. We did it on Bel-Air, and it was such a miracle to me that
you don't know how you could recreate it.
I don't think I could, but I'm perfectly willing to sell the screenplays to anybody who thinks they could and help them in any way that it can.
And so your representation at WME, are they have those scripts as well? They just no one.
Yeah, no. To my surprise, this guy who hired me, the 2 samples. I knew they had sent him a copy of Willie Francis so he could see that, but they'd also sent him the Frank Hamer script.
Oh, okay.
And which the story is built around a true story. When the Germans invaded France and were getting ready to invade England, Frank Hamer was a 60-something-year-old retired Texas Ranger, and he wrote to the King of England and said, I think that's terrible. If you want to, I'll get some of my other retired Ranger buddies and we'll go over there and protect you from the Germans. And the King of England wrote back and said, please hurry. And and the ambassador came see him and said, "You're not going to go by yourself, huh?" He said, "You know, the German army's pretty big." He says, "Oh no, there's 10 or 12 of us. Don't worry about it." But that was the attitude of these old Texas Rangers. Don't matter how many you got. We'll take care of you. But I love that story. Love that story.
So you have them. They're, at any point they could be picked up, and hopefully they will.
When
they all sound fantastically interesting.
Well, if you're going to write a screenplay, it better be interesting, or you're not going to get to page 100. I mean, it's hard enough to finish one and do it properly anyway. Mm-hmm. But you better love the story, because there's going to be plenty of times when you say, I'd really rather go to the movies or go get a beer, or really rather cut the grass. Anything but do this. Mm-hmm. And so you better love it. But, every time I get a chance of getting a conversation with somebody, every time I get somebody talking about, have you ever written any love stories? And I said, yeah, I wrote one about the greatest love story ever told. It's a young Jewish couple and star-crossed lovers. And her name was Mary Magdalene. And I keep throwing that one out there. And but I'm always pushing them every chance I get.
Right.
But it's, there's no accounting for taste. I just think those stories are fabulous. I can't understand why anybody hadn't gone and make them. But
and I think that at least in the independent film world, independent film really died in theaters, and it seems, at least now, that the Netflixes and the Amazons, they're starting to realize that there's a market for independent films,
right,
and they're just putting it straight to Netflix. So, as filmmakers, you kind of dream of seeing on the silver screen, but you also dream of it just ever being made.
Yeah.
And it seems like nowadays you have with a great story and a smaller budget and something that's a little more, not a blockbuster type film, you almost have more of a chance of seeing it on television or on Netflix or something than you do on HBO, whatever it is, made strictly for them. How do you feel about that?
If Netflix came to me and said, we'll give you the money to make Willie Francis, but it's going straight to Netflix, I'd probably turn it down, because I know I'm never going to get my hands on a story that good again.
Right.
So if I'm ever gonna hit one over the fence,
it's gonna be with that one.
It's gonna be Willie Francis.
I know.
Now, if they came to me and they wanted to make Liberation of Paris or Frank Hamer or one of those, I'd probably say, when do we start?
Right.
But,
right. Because I mean, at least what I've heard is that for them, when they sign on to a project, they are all about the creative. It seems like it's a lot better than your normal studio that's breathing down your neck or whatever. Netflix is all about, you tell the story that you want to tell, kind of thing. So I get where you're coming from, though, with Willie Francis. I mean, it is your love child story. And although I have heard that they, at least with a few other films, they do a thing now where they release it in theaters for a certain amount of time, and then it's on Netflix, to where they still are eligible for Academy Award.
To be eligible for Academy Award consideration, your film has to play 1 week in Los Angeles and 1 week in New York, with advertisements for 1 week in the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times. That's what it requires. If you do that, you don't have to play anywhere else. But you're
get it.
But you're eligible.
Yeah.
Which is probably how the O.J. Simpson documentary won Best Documentary last year, because it went. I think that was an ESPN production.
It was.
And a
really good 7-hour long one.
Really powerful film. And, but I think that's how they did it.
I know they're changing.
That had to be it.
I know. I think they're changing the rules now, because there was some,
For feature films, that's what you have to do.
Right.
For documentaries, especially for short documentaries, there are certain film festivals that if you win them,
you're eligible.
You're automatically qualified.
Yeah, I think New Orleans Film Festival now is a short film.
It is a short film automatic qualifier.
Right. But with the OJ thing, we're getting off topic a little bit, but I think because you know how that was a 7 hour long and they ended up releasing
Yeah.
it kind of in like almost like a television show where
Yeah.
it's like different episodes. I thought the film was absolutely fantastic and obviously deserved the Oscar, but I think that they're changing the rules now that you can't release it the way they did. It has to be one.
okay.
It has to be because you know they ended up releasing it in episodic form.
Yeah.
It has to be one. So in that case, it would have been a 7 hour film. Okay, but I want to talk a little bit more about the Nicholl Fellowship because you can see your speech online. It's on the Academy Nicholl website, and
If you Google my name, you just hit the first one. That's the speech.
and I urge, and again, this is so great to talk to you because there is a huge film scene, not only in Lafayette but obviously all of Louisiana,
Right.
but definitely some in Lafayette too. You know, aspiring screenwriters, filmmakers. So talking to someone who has met the success that you have, and like you said, you got to run with the success because it ain't gonna last long.
Yeah, it doesn't last.
But one of so I urge everyone to listen to your speech, but I'd like you to talk about it real quick because what was really interesting is you mentioned, I believe it was the writer of the King's Speech,
Yeah.
and how it was nice whenever you saw that to see someone, a fellow gray-haired fellow,
Yeah.
accepting an award. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, and this Glenn Petrie had told. Glenn's in the Writers Guild, and he said a few years ago the Writers Guild had a program for disadvantaged screenwriters, and there were 5 categories: African American, Hispanic, women, physically disabled, or the 5th category was writers over 50. Because, I mean, in Oscars last year, Jimmy Kimmel even made a joke about it. You know, we do not discriminate on the basis of race or religion in Hollywood. We only discriminate on the basis of age.
Right.
And which is, I had a senior guy at TNT tell me, because I went, this is 4 or 5 years ago, I said, am I wasting my time at my age just because of my age? And he said, in film, maybe not. In television, I would tell you, you're absolutely wasting your time. They're not going to hire
They're not going to sign you in a writer's room or something because of your age.
You're not. They're not going to hire you just because of your age. Doesn't matter how good you are.
Right. Blatant discrimination.
So, and you know, I figured, you know, you can't, when you win one Academy Award, you probably ought to take advantage of it and not assume you're going to get another chance to make another speech.
Right.
So I started my speech by saying I'd like to thank all the members of the Academy. And then I stopped and I said, well, I can't tell you how good it is to be saying that, not looking into my bathroom mirror.
Right.
And then I said, but seriously, I want to thank all the members of the Academy, because I want to say it more than once.
Yeah, right.
And then
Get it out as many times as you
I
can.
talked about the writer of the King's Speech who had won the Oscar that year, and he gets up there, and he's 70 years old. So he looks 70 years old. And I was thrilled that, that somebody that age was recognized by the Academy. And so I couldn't pass up a chance to be a wise guy. So I said, for all you studio executives and producers out there, when you get that big heart attack and you stumble into the emergency room, do you say, get me a medical student and make it a freshman? At that time, are you looking for that fresh young voice with a new approach? and the people laughed.
Right.
It was funny.
I think you had mentioned, I think the saying was, since when did
age and experience
become a
negative,
right, or a disability?
Yeah.
And that was a great point. And I think everyone in the room at that moment,
yeah,
it was a moment of silence. They realized kind of how ridiculous that was, and that the fact that
everybody in there was given their time to an event honoring screenwriters. So there was a room especially sympathetic to screenwriters. At the Oscars, there would have been boo, boo, get him off of the
right. Well, no one wants to hear a writer speak anyway at the Oscars, so add that to it, and you just added, oil.
But if I ever win an Oscar, you can plan on hearing that same speech again. I can promise you.
I believe it, and I think it would be a good one. Okay, so this has been awesome. I appreciate you speaking with me.
My pleasure.
I feel like there
it's
was
been fun.
It has been fun. There was something else I wanted to ask you, and I cannot
Come back
remember.
after I get another one of these little gold guys. We'll
Oh,
do it
you know
again.
we can't. I know what it is. I will, by the way, because you will. I know you will. But we didn't speak about your most recent documentary, which
Cajun Navy.
yeah, I was lucky enough to actually come and help you shoot a few interviews.
Yes.
So I appreciate the call. But yeah, let's talk about that.
The best Katrina story that has never been told. It's, as you know, it's a story about the roughnecks and cooks and doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs who grabbed their 15-foot boats and snuck around the police barricades into New Orleans after Katrina. And over that first 3 days before General Honore got there with the army, saved 10,000 people who otherwise, at least 10,000 people who otherwise would have died. And to my astonishment, if you haven't seen my documentary or talked to me about it, you probably don't know about the story. Or if you haven't,
There's like one book about it, right, or a smaller book.
Trent Andrews with Acadiana Profile
That's right.
published a book on it about one of the people who went there and saved 800 people over 3 days.
That's
but,
incredible.
Because when you talk to when I interviewed these people who went there and did it, you know, not one of them thinks they did anything heroic. I mean, they just
Did what they had to do.
They just, you know, what else could I do? I mean, it's people needed help. I'm not going to sit down and watch, and not one of them thought they did anything heroic. So they're not going to talk about it. And
You had to beg them for an interview, kind of thing.
well, I mean, some of them were. Someone didn't want to. Just said no. It's just something I did, and I don't need any congratulations. And other ones, you know, I either went through their wives or their kids and got them to talk about it because they things that happened to each one of them that they thought were particularly sad and bothered them, and it was kind of cathartic for them to be able to talk about it a little bit.
Right.
But I mean, the stories were so interesting. I mean, it just you know the New Orleans police calling into the emergency center from 3 or 4 precincts around town, saying they had run out of ammunition. I mean, you think you ever heard that in the United States
Right.
after the Civil War, since the Civil War, and you know, it's probably the only instance I know of in world history where people are trapped in a catastrophe and their neighbors who come rescue them are getting shot at by the people who are coming to rescue them. Not all of them, obviously, a very
Right.
small percentage.
But it's happening.
But it's happened. It happened. And when you talk to the people that are there, they said, you know, the firing was like popcorn. It was just going off all night. You know, they'd hear it.
And so why? I mean, what did they think? Was it they were thinking they were looting houses instead of saving people, or
No, I mean, there was just if you spend any time in New Orleans or any other big city, but with that level of poverty, there is a criminal element there, which once law and order disappears, just follows their natural tendencies to create chaos.
right? And the stories, I feel like, you know, particularly relevant now after the August floods, because you saw the Cajun Navy come back out since Katrina, pretty much first time.
Yeah, I mean, Doug Bienvenu, one of the heroes of my film, was in an airboat, and airboat's real loud and you can't hear it, and he feels something go right by him and doesn't pay attention. It's while he's loading people from the top of a house into his boat. I mean, he's taking victims into his boat and gets a hole shot through his boat. I mean, it's not like, I mean, you could. It's almost impossible to understand and explain.
A fascinating story.
Fascinating story. Love fascinating story.
Where can we watch it? Whoever's listening, if they're interested as well.
I'm hoping it's going to be on Louisiana Public Television sometime around the anniversary of Katrina in August. I've offered it to them. If not, I'm going to offer it. Of course, I think Houston Public Television will do it because I've got a history with them. and I'm offered the national public television, but it'll either be there or something.
And what's the title of it?
The Cajun Navy.
Gotcha. Well, I'm eager to see that film, and I hope that as many people as possible are able to watch it.
I hope LPV picks it up, because it's the people who did that, the 50 or 100 heroes who refused to turn around when the police said, "Go home, you can't. It's too dangerous. You can't go in there." Those people certainly should be recognized.
They went in anyway.
You know, think about it. How many people do you know, not doctors, ordinary people, can say, "I saved 800 lives one weekend"?
I don't know anyone.
Or 1,000 or 500.
Well, and the fact of,
it's a rare thing to be able to say, "I saved a life."
Right, and to think that had they not crossed the police barrier, right, had they not gone...
Well, they snuck around. They pretended like they were leaving and snuck
So
back
technically, going against law and order.
Oh, yeah,
had they not, thousands of people could have died.
Because most
more.
of these
I mean,
people,
obviously, a lot of people died, but more could have died.
Some of these people say 30-40% of the people they picked up were disabled. They were all either real elderly or children. They were in a house with no food and no drinkable water. And so in heat in August in New Orleans, and some of the rescuers talk about they don't ever remember being anywhere was that hot before. And so those people couldn't have lived 3 more days in those conditions.
And so they drove with their airboats as far as they could go down I-10, and then once the water,
some went on I-10, some went on Highway 9. They went different. There was only one guy in an airboat. The rest of them were just regular old 15-foot fishing boats.
Gotcha. And they just went as far as they could, dumped the boats, and then went to New Orleans.
Just went looking for people on roofs, and it wasn't hard to find them.
Right. Incredible. Well, again, we look forward to hopefully seeing that film. Also, the screenplay and hopeful eventual film is Willie Francis Must Die Again, documentary by the same name, narrated by Danny Glover, as well as a plethora of other works under his belt. Sprinky, I appreciate you sitting down to talk with me.
Always a pleasure.
And the office is looking great. It looks really great. I'm sorry that
we flooded here,
right,
so
of course. I'm sorry the flood is the reason for the renovation, but the renovation looks excellent.
Thank you. My daughter made all the choices, so she gets the credit.
When it started flood, did you come back just to make sure to get the Academy? You didn't want that thing floating away.
Well, I knew it wouldn't float, so I wasn't really worried about it.
That's true.
And I really didn't think we were going to get water in the office. And then once it came in, I knew it wasn't going to be. My daughter was keeping an eye on it, and I knew it wasn't very much.
Good. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We will have more interviews that'll hopefully be just as interesting as this one. It's time to highlight some special people in Lafayette. So, of course, I appreciate Allan Durand sitting down with me, one of the most special people in the town.
Well, it